Hi, third graders. We're going to continue reading Flora and Ulysses today. And in this story, I had mentioned the first time that we were going to take a look at the characters in the story and kind of see how the characters might change over time, especially Flora. Okay, so already we can see Flora is going to be our main character, and she's really important to watch throughout the story and kind of see how she changes and how she develops over time. And one way to do that is to keep track of who she comes in contact with, okay? And kind of think about who does she interact with, who does she talk to, okay? Um, and kind of look at it at a sense of does the people she meet throughout the book kind of change who she is as a character, okay? And kind of thinking about this in the sense of for those of us who've read Because of Winn-Dixie, I know some of us read it at the beginning of the school year. We really looked at Opal in that story and how Opal met all the different people in Naomi, Florida. And each of the characters kind of taught her something different, and kind of helped her to become who she was. And then in the end of the book, they all came together, and we really saw how they helped her change. So we also want to think about how might each of the characters in this book, maybe how will they affect Flora and the way she acts, okay? So we know that Flora has met Mrs. Tickum, okay? She went to the neighbor when the squirrel got stuck in the vacuum cleaner, right? So she's met Mrs. Tickum, and we know that her mom is there with her. So let's kind of think about how does that, I don't know, inspire Flora? How does it change Flora? Maybe it won't help them. Maybe those characters won't help her change, but it's something to keep in mind of who she's connected to as we go through the book. Okay, so chapter 8 is called Helpful Information. Flora and Mrs. Tickum noticed at the same time. The squirrel, said Flora. The vacuum cleaner, said Mrs. Tickum. Together they stared at the Ulysses 2000X and at the squirrel who was holding it over his head with one paw. That can't be, said Mrs. Tickum. The squirrel shook the vacuum cleaner. Okay, so if we remember what happened at the end last time, the squirrel had held up the vacuum cleaner. So now they're kind of looking at him in amazement of how on earth is he holding that up and how on earth is he shaking it? That can't be, said Mrs. Tickum. You already said that, said Flora. I'm repeating myself? You're repeating yourself. Maybe I have a brain tumor, said Mrs. Tickum. It was certainly possible that Mrs. Tickum had a brain tumor. Flora knew from reading Terrible Things Can Happen to You that a surprising number of people were walking around with illnesses and didn't even know it. That was the thing about tragedy. It was just sitting there, keeping you company and waiting. And you had absolutely no idea. This was the kind of helpful information you could get from the comics if you paid attention. The other kind of information that you absorbed from the regular reading of comics, most particularly from the regular reading of the illuminated adventures of the amazing Incandesto, was that impossible things happened all the time. For instance, heroes, superheroes, were born of ridiculous and unlikely circumstances. Spider bites, chemical spills, planetary dislocation, and in the case of Alfred T. Slipper, from accidental submersion in an industrial-sized vat of cleaning solution called Incandesto, the cleaning professional's hardworking friend. I don't think you have a brain tumor, said Flora. There might be another explanation. Uh-huh, said Mrs. Tickum. What's the other explanation? Have you ever heard of Incandesto? What? Said Mrs. Tickum. Who? Said Flora. Incandesto is a who. He's a superhero. Right, said Mrs. Tickum. And your point is? Flora raised her right hand. She pointed with a single finger at the squirrel. Surely you're not implying, said Mrs. Tickum. The squirrel lowered the vacuum cleaner to the ground. He held himself very still. He considered both of them. His whiskers twitched and trembled. There were cracker crumbs on his head. He was a squirrel. Could he be a superhero too? Alfred T. Slipper was a janitor. Most of the time, people looked right past him. Sometimes, often, in fact, they treated him with disdain. They had no idea of the astonishing acts of heroism, the blinding light contained within his outward humdrum disguise. Let's go back to that word disdain. Sometimes, often, in fact, they treated him with disdain. I wonder what disdain means. Maybe it means they didn't treat him very well. And I'm going to think that because up here it says, people looked right past him. They had no idea of the astonishing acts of heroism, meaning maybe they didn't know how great he was. Only Alfred's parakeet, Dolores, knew who he was and what he could do. The world will misunderstand him, said Flora. You bet it will, said Mrs. Tickum. Tootie, shouted Mr. Tickum from the back door. Tootie, I'm hungry. Tootie? What a ridiculous name. Flora couldn't resist the urge to say it out loud. Tootie, she said. Tootie Tickum? Listen, Tootie, go inside, feed your husband. Say nothing to him or to anyone else about any of this. Right, said Tootie. Say nothing. Feed my husband. Okay, right. She began walking slowly to the house. Mr. Tickum called out, Are you done vacuuming? What about Ulysses? Are you just going to leave it sitting there? Ulysses, whispered Flora. She felt a shiver run from the back of her head to the base of her spine. She might be a natural-born cynic, but she knew the right word when she heard it. Ulysses, she said again. What do you think she's going to do with that? She bent down and held out her hand to the squirrel. Come here, Ulysses, she said. The whole world on fire. She spoke to him, and he understood her. What the girl said was, Ulysses, come here, Ulysses, and without thinking, he moved toward her. It's okay, she said, and he believed her. It was astonishing. Everything was astonishing. The setting sun was illuminating each blade of grass. It was reflecting off the girl's glasses, making a halo of light around the girl's round head, setting the whole world on fire. The squirrel thought, when did things become so beautiful? And if it has been this way all along, how is it that I never noticed before? Listen to me, the girl said. My name is Flora. Your name is Ulysses. Okay, thought the squirrel. She put her hand on him. She picked him up. She cradled him in her left arm. He felt nothing but happiness. Why has he always been so terrified of humans? He couldn't imagine. Actually, he could imagine. So here she is holding him nicely. What do you think he could imagine about always being afraid of humans? There had been that time that boy, there had truthfully been a lot of incidents with humans, and all of them had been violent, terrifying, and soul-destroying. But this was a whole new life, and he was a changed squirrel. He felt spectacular, strong, smart, capable, and also hungry. He was very, very hungry. So now that Flora has him in her hand, and the squirrel's thinking about how nice she is, what's she going to do with him? Smuggling? Oh, squirrel smuggling. What does it mean to smuggle something? So as we read this chapter, I want you to think about what that word might mean. Okay, squirrel smuggling. Flora's mother was in the kitchen. She was typing, and she wrote on an old typewriter, and when she pounded the keys, the kitchen table shook, and the plates on the shelves rattled, and the silverware in the drawers cried out in a metallic kind of alarm. Flora had decided that this was part of the reason her parents had divorced. Not the noise of the writing, but the writing itself. Flora's father had said, I think that your mother is so in love with her books that she doesn't love me anymore. And her mother had said, Ha, your father is so far off in left field that he wouldn't recognize love if it stood up in his soup and sang. Flora had a hard time imagining what love would be doing standing in a bowl of soup and singing. But these were the kinds of words her parents spoke. And they said the words to each other even though they were pretending that they were talking to Flora. It was all very annoying. What are you doing? Her mother said to Flora. She was sucking on a pitzer pop. It made her words sound rocky and sharp-edged. Her mother used to smoke when she stopped, but her mother used to smoke and then she stopped. But she still had to have something in her mouth when she typed, so she consumed a lot of pitzer pops. This one was orange flavored, and Flora could smell it. Oh, nothing, said Flora. She glanced at the squirrel in her arms. Good, said her mother. She whacked the carriage return on the typewriter without looking up. She kept typing. Are you still standing there? Her mother said. She typed some more words. She hit the carriage return again. I'm on a deadline here. It's hard to concentrate with you standing over me breathing like that. I could stop breathing, said Flora. Oh, don't be ridiculous, said her mother. Go upstairs and wash your hands. We're going to eat soon. Okay, said Flora. She walked past her mother and into the living room, still carrying Ulysses in the crook of her arm. So this whole time, does Flora's mom even realize that Flora has something in her hands? Like an animal from the outside world that probably shouldn't be in her house? It didn't seem possible, but it was true. She had smuggled a squirrel into the house, and she had done it right under her mother's nose, or behind her back, or something. So there's that word smuggled again. What do you think it means? It didn't seem possible, but it was true. She had smuggled a squirrel into the house, and she had done it right under her mother's nose, or behind her back, or something. In the living room at the base of the stairs, the little shepherdess lamp was waiting, a pink cheek smirked plastered on her face. Flora hated the little shepherdess. Her mother had bought the lamp with her first royalty check from her first book, On Feathered Wings of Joy, which was the stupidest title for a book that Flora had ever heard in her entire life. Her mother had sent away to London for the lamp. When it arrived, she unpacked it and plugged it in. And then she clamped her hands and said, Oh, she's so beautiful. Isn't she beautiful? I love her with all my heart. Flora's mother never called Flora beautiful. She never said that she loved her with all of her heart. Luckily, Flora was a cynic and didn't care whether her mother loved her or not. I think that I will call her Mary Ann, her mother had said. Mary Ann, said Flora. You're going to name a lamp? Mary Ann, shepherdess to the lost, said her mother. Who's lost exactly? Said Flora. But her mother hadn't bothered to answer that question. This, Flora said to the squirrel, is the little shepherdess. Her name is Mary Ann. Unfortunately, she lives here too. The squirrel considered Mary Ann. Flora narrowed her eyes and stared at the lamp. She knew that it was ridiculous, but sometimes she felt as if Mary Ann knew something that she didn't know, that the little shepherdess was keeping some dark and terrible secret. You stupid lamp, said Flora. Mind your own business. Mind your sheep. Actually, there was just one sheep, a tiny lamb curled up at Mary Ann's pink slippered feet. Flora always wanted to say to the little shepherdess, If you're such a great shepherdess, where are the rest of your sheep, huh? We can just ignore her, said Flora to Ulysses. She turned away from the smug and glowing Mary Ann and climbed the stairs to her room, holding Ulysses gently, carefully in her arms. He didn't glow, but he was surprisingly warm for someone so small. Okay, so in the picture, the lamp is right here by the stairs. So that's the shepherdess that she's talking about. Okay. So now with this section we read, what do you think happened to the squirrel? He got sucked up into a vacuum and they got him out, but now all of a sudden he can hear what Flora is saying and he understands her. Because when she said, come here, he came. And now he's just hanging out in her arms and she brought him into her house and he seems to be perfectly okay with hanging out there in her arms, right? So what happened to the squirrel? And another question I have for you is while we were reading, it really seemed that Flora really despises or really dislikes the lamp at the bottom of the stairs. What are some clues from the reading that kind of explain to you why she might dislike that lamp? Why doesn't she like the shepherdess? And why does she have such strong feelings about it being in her house? All right, so just some things to think about. And I will see you soon to continue the story.